The second point about the problematic concepts in the curriculum is what appears to be an invitation to engage in sexual activities and encouragement to become sexually active. There's an over-sexualizing environment that comes out of this curriculum. Now, a lot of people rejected the idea that the curriculum encourages students to engage in sexual activities. Even the ministry and some school boards said we will never encourage students to engage in sexual activities. But based on the wording that appeared in teachers' prompts, we will show you when we get to that section how this concern is actually clear. Before we get to that point, I want to talk about teachers' prompts, because a lot of people said, and the ministry also said, the controversial teachers' prompts are just suggestions. And when we asked the ministry, we actually asked Kathleen Wynne herself. I was one of 6 parents that actually met with Kathleen Wynne to discuss the controversial curriculum and to voice our concerns. And unfortunately, she was not responsive at all. So when we raised that issue, they said teachers' prompts are only suggestions. So we said, if they're only suggestions and they're so problematic, why didn't you take them out of the curriculum? There was absolutely no response to that. But let me read to you from page number 20 in the curriculum that talks about teachers' prompts. So as I said, a lot of people would say, oh, these are just suggestions. They mean nothing. Do they really mean nothing? On page 20, paragraph number 2, under examples, teacher prompts, and student responses, it explained what teacher prompts means. They say most of the specific expectations are accompanied by examples. Teacher prompts, as requested by educators, the ones that designed the curriculum, and student responses. These elements are intended to promote understanding of the intent of the specific expectations and are offered as illustrations for teachers. So one more time. Teachers' prompts are described in the curriculum clearly as these elements are intended to promote the understanding of the intent of the specific expectations. So teacher prompts, my dear brothers and sisters, they're not just suggestions. They're not just there to mean nothing, and they're not just there with no value. They're there to show the intention of the curriculum. So this is exactly, clearly, the intention of the curriculum as stated by the curriculum. The second point under the invitation to engage in sexual activities, or the perceived invitation to engage in sexual activities, is there was absolutely no proper risk assessment, harm and benefit analysis on sexual activities. And we will see as we start reading the curriculum, and that was stated by many experts, and one of them being Dr. Miriam Grossman, who's a medical doctor in New York, and she's also a psychiatrist. Dr. Grossman visited us in 2015, and she gave a beautiful talk on the topic about the risk associated with such sexual activities. And these videos are available on YouTube, and you will see the YouTube address on the screen, so you can go and refer. I advise you to go and listen to Dr. Grossman when she talks about the risk assessment and the risks associated with the sexual activities discussed in the curriculum. So we will read in parts of the curriculum where they talk about certain sexual activities that are highly, highly risky, scientifically risky. Everybody supports, all science society supports that they're risky. However, the curriculum does not talk about the risk of those activities. They actually introduce them as a very pleasurable and normal behavior and normal actions. They also present those ideas with no authoritative tone, meaning they don't guide the students towards the right thing to do from a scientific perspective. Now, we're not talking about values and not talking about faith and religion. We're talking about scientifically proven harms. If we know we have scientifically proven harms, why aren't we deterring our kids from engaging in such activities? However, when we look at tobacco and we look at addictive substances discussed in the curriculum, the ministry did a great job deterring students from consuming or using such substances. They made it clear that tobacco is harmful. They made it clear that some drugs are harmful. And they made it very clear that they don't want students to engage in such activities. But when it comes to sexual engagement, that was not the tone. The tone was very mellow. The tone was very inviting as opposed to deterring. The third problematic point that bothered a lot of parents is undermining parents' authority, cultural and religious consideration. A lot of parents were upset because they were never consulted. There was no proper consultation. There was no proper consideration of different values and different religious beliefs, and it was done in a certain way that appeared to be enforced upon everybody, irrespective of religious rights and irrespective of the diversity, the beautiful diversity that we have in Canada. The first point under undermining parents' authority is parents' consultation. As we said, there was no proper parents' consultation that took place. The government claimed they've consulted a number of families. However, everybody attests to the fact that that was not done. And when it was done, it was brief and it was not clear. And it was kind of a biased survey that was sent out to parents, so it was not done properly. Although there was a promise when the curriculum was pulled out in 2010 that a proper consultation would be done, but that was clearly and seems like it was deliberately overlooked in order for them to just push the curriculum in 2015. The second point under undermining parents' authority is cultural and religious considerations. Now, this is getting really stormy and delicate, as described in the book of the history of sex education. There are certain ideas are introduced in the curriculum that go against a lot of people's faith. And as we all know, in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, people are entitled for their faith and their beliefs, and as long as we don't have any competing beliefs that will cause social instability or harm on a certain group, people are entitled for their beliefs as long as they keep it for themselves to manage their own life and not to act upon it or to cause chaos or to cause harm on other groups. However, it seems like there's a serious infringement on a lot of people's beliefs and a lot of people's values. Starting with the concept of gender identity. Now, it's very clear that the main difference between the old curriculum and the new curriculum is the idea of gender equity and gender identity, which we respect that this issue or this topic has to be addressed properly in the educational system. And you know, this is a part of inclusivity, and this is what we love about Canada. It's a room for everybody. However, it becomes really agitating when we feel that there's a certain idea that's being imposed on others. The Canada that we know, the Canada that we love, is a Canada that has room for everybody, the Canada that respects everybody's values and everybody's faith and beliefs, and give room for everybody to live according to their faith. But what we see here is there's an unacceptable approach when it comes to certain ideas. Gender identity, as described in the curriculum on page 231, gender identity is taught in the curriculum to grade 3, I believe, and we'll go over that in a short while. Gender identity is explained as a person's sense of self with respect to being male or female. Gender identity is different from sexual orientation and may be different from birth assigned sex. Now, the problem with this concept is there are a lot of people that base gender identity on their religious understanding and traditional biological and scientific understanding, which is the concept of having a male and a female. And people take this to heart. This is serious. And when the school teaches our children that, by the way, you have the right and the liberty to choose your sex, to choose your gender identity, to determine whether you are a male or a female based on your feelings, this is unacceptable. If some people want to accept this as a fact or a way of life, we're not opposing to it. But what we're saying here is, do not enforce this upon our children. Do not enforce this concept upon people that have serious issues with this concept based on their faith and based on their values. And they have the right to maintain their faith. They have the right to keep their beliefs. And as I said, every group has the right to exist with their own values, with their own way of life, and we are obligated to respect one another, to respect one another's choices without imposing our ideas and our values on one another. So with this, we believe that by teaching our kids this concept in school, you are infringing on their rights, you are undermining parents' authorities, you're undermining religious considerations. The other important point under this category is the concept of consent. On the concept of consent, in a document called Quick Facts for Parents produced by the Ministry of Education, they explain what does sexual consent mean. And they clearly answer, sexual consent is about a person's right to be able to choose yes or choose no. Second point, sexual consent involves clear and intentional agreement to participate in sexual activity communicated either verbally or non-verbally between individuals. A person who is unconscious, not capable, intoxicated, or has been coerced or forced cannot give consent. So again, we have a big problem with this as parents. You're teaching my child here that you have the right to make a decision, to say yes or no. Saying yes or no in any reasonable mind means you're negotiating. So you are teaching the child to negotiate, to say yes or no. To negotiate what? To negotiate an offer to engage in sexual activity as per the second point. Sexual consent involves clear and intentional agreement to participate in sexual activity. So again, this goes against science, this goes against every value and tradition where you're putting such critical negotiation and such critical decision in the hands of children that, according to science, are not fully developed to make reasonable decision and to evaluate things reasonably. And now we're telling them you have the right to say yes and mark this down, yes before no. So a good intention will be to say no. You have the right to say no. So if a perpetrator approaches a child and asks them to engage, you have the right to say no. This would be the approach of a concerned organization or a concerned ministry that wants to protect children and not give them the option to engage or not to engage. They would tell students, say no. They would tell children, say no. But no, what they say here is, you have the right to say yes or say no. Again, this is encouraging students to negotiate an engagement in sexual activity, which is absolutely rejected by parents, absolutely rejected by no parents would want their children to go through this and make such decisions. It's a clear infringement on parents' rights. It's a clear undermining of parental rights that we reject, and we have the right to reject it. The fourth point under undermining parents' authority is teachers' bias and diligence. So we've seen in many cases that some teachers are biased. So if they're supporting a certain way of life, they will exaggerate in promoting that certain way of life, and they will try to influence students to accept a certain way of life, knowing that many students, in a diverse environment, people have different evaluation, different approach when it comes to sexual activities and relationships. However, it's been clearly reported in many incidents that teachers will promote a certain way of life and will push children to accept a certain way of life, which is extremely unacceptable. And we're also seeing that many teachers will be more diligent in exaggerating their way of explaining things, or in introducing different ideas to make sure they get the intended idea across through different ways. And we will talk about how far some teachers went in addressing such issues or such topics with our children, and how serious and critical it could get, and it could get to what could be considered a criminal act when it's when the idea is introduced to a child. And the last point under undermining parents' authority is the imbalanced presentation of lifestyle. We see that in many schools, there's an over promotion of a certain lifestyle and undermining other lifestyles. Again, in diverse Canada, you got people from different backgrounds, different races, different religions, different ethnicities, and they all proud of their background, they're all proud of their ethnic roots, and they all have the rights to be proud of that. So when we put the focus on a Pink Day, for example, on a certain group neglecting the others, this is completely unfair, and it needs to be dealt with immediately, and the balance needs to be kept. We said it many, many times. All what we're asking for is the balance in addressing all backgrounds, all ethnicities, all ways of lives. It's the balance in respecting everybody and not giving more room to a certain group on the account of others. So that was the overview of the main points that parents and experts relied on to oppose the sex education. These are serious, serious points. Unfortunately, unlike the accusations that were thrown at a lot of parents that they're ignorant, they're never read the curriculum, and if they read the curriculum, they never understood the curriculum, or they misunderstood the curriculum, that parents were just following rumors, that parents were just being religious extremists or being bigots and being phobes. And unfortunately, it got to a point where some newspapers and some articles were written, they said, do these parents fit in a modern society? So unfortunately, the attack was huge on parents, although, as I mentioned, these are legitimate concerns supported by science and supported by experts. But someone doesn't want the parents to speak up. Someone doesn't want the public to know the danger in this curriculum. And this leads us to the question, who designed this curriculum? It was very well known, it's no secret, that the main figure behind the designing of this curriculum is Benjamin Levin, who was actually convicted in 2015 or 2016, if I remember, of pedophilia against his own children. He was also engaged in child pornography. Benjamin Levin was part of the designing team of this curriculum. This is very, very concerning, very disturbing, and this calls for it to be reviewed. All what we're asking for is for it to be reviewed by experts, by scientists, by medical doctors, and proper consultation with parents.